Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and on the eve of the annual pilgrimage by Muslims to Mecca, we're talking about the growing war of words between Iran and Saudi Arabia. We're doing so in the company of Faisal Abu Al-Hassan, researcher at the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies. Welcome back as well to Iranian analyst and former activist Farouk Nagadar, who joins us from London. In New York, Bernard Heikel of Princeton University, the author of Revival and Reform in Islam, The Legacy of Mohammed al-Shawkani. And from Beirut, Hilal Kashan, who teaches at the American University of Beirut. Now, a lot of reactions to our discussion. One, I think what's happening in Saudi Arabia is awful, and the Hajj pilgrimage needs to be better run to help the people. Yes, the Iranians absent from this year's Hajj, with the pilgrims who are already there divided over the tough talk from their Saudi hosts.
I know there's a lot of talk, but for me as an Egyptian, I just want Saudi Arabia to be the leader in Islam and the source of legislation and even the source of formal holidays, because Saudi Arabia is the symbol of Islam, of the glory and the resistance of Islam.
My response is that Hajj brings together all Muslims, and all Muslims are brothers. The Prophet, peace be upon him, came with a message that Muslims are brothers. Politics do not fit into religion. That's my opinion. Politics are on one side and religion is on another. We're all Muslim brothers.
Hilal Kashan, just to remind our viewers who aren't Muslim, just how different is Sunni Islam from Shia Islam, and how much does it matter, you might say, when you approach something like the Hajj?
Yeah, sure. Sunni Muslims argue that the difference between the two sects is rather political. Shiites disagree, and they talk about a fundamental split in Islam that emerged right after the death of Prophet Muhammad, and the main divide concerned who would succeed the Prophet. Imam Ali, the cousin of the Prophet, argued, and as well as his supporters, that the line of succession should remain in the household of the Prophet. And this issue continued to build up over the years until eventually 12 Imami Shi'ism took its final shape during the years of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. As far as the structure and the structure of religion, and as far as religious tenets, actually the differences between Sunnism and Shiism are rather minor. In one way or another, you might find the 12 Imami Shiism closer to one school of the four Sunni schools than the three other Sunni schools of Islam. So I would argue that for the most part the divide is religious, that is political, that eventually turned into religious.
Is a political divide that has become a religious divide. Faisal, let me ask you about this, because we've seen time and again in conflicts like in Syria and Iraq where all sides have their proxies. How do you get the message across for counter-radicalization? Bernard Heikel talking about the problem with Al-Qaeda inside Saudi Arabia. How do you get that counter-radicalization message across when at the same time you're stoking this sectarian hatred between Sunnis and Shias?
Well, I'm not sure if it's fair to say that Saudi Arabia is stroking the sectarian hatred. There's a lot of sectarian hatred that's appeared in the Middle East since 1979 on both sides. And it's true that maybe at a certain point in the 1980s, there was a lot of support for Saudi Arabia for sectarian groups. But we've seen since Al-Qaeda appeared in Saudi Arabia in the early 90s, Saudi Arabia, as with most Arab states, I clarify Arab states, moving towards more pragmatic policies, foreign policies, domestic policies, and regional policies. On the other hand, we
get the impression when, for instance, we see that Saudi Arabia is officially a part of this anti-ISIS coalition in Syria and Iraq.
And who has Saudi Arabia supported in Syria from the beginning?
But we have the impression that on the ground, the number one obsession is containing things, people like Hezbollah and those that are closer to Tehran.
Well, is it about containing Hezbollah because they're closer to Tehran, or about containing Hezbollah because they're fighting with the butcherist regime, murdering thousands of people of all sects?
But we get the impression that that is a top priority ahead of fighting ISIS.
I don't think that's a top. I mean, I think the top priority for Saudi Arabia was to support the Syrian opposition, and the Syrian opposition's been fighting a lot of the regime, but they've been fighting ISIS as well. I don't think it's fair to say. I don't prescribe personally to this debate that it's sectarian. I think there's a lot of political support for sectarian militias on one side, and there's a lot of pragmatic support for more pluralist and state-oriented.
And do you
groups
agree
in
with
Saudi
what
Arabia.
Hilal Khashan just said, that the spiritual divide is not that big, it's more of a political divide?
Yeah, I would definitely agree.
Do you agree as well, Farouk Nagadar?
Of course, the political divide is the main thing. And if we want to get rid of this division, this conflict, we have to open up in our own society. As far as the Saudi Arabia open up its border, its political system to the ordinary people, and as election gets more momentum or impact on the society, then the way for negotiations, for using diplomacy to sort out the divisions, makes more space for diplomacy. This is the solution for this intention between Iran and Saudi Arabia. If we want to sort it out, we have to open up in our society and give more space for election and freedom and democracy.
Bernard Heikel, we see young populations in both Iran and Saudi Arabia. What do you think of the solution there prescribed by Farouk Nagadar? More open societies will tone down the tension.
I don't agree, I have to say. I mean, Iran is a theocracy. They do have elections, but basically you have one.
To some extent, they have. There is no lack of election like Saudi Arabia. To some extent, presidential and parliament is elective.
It's true. You have elections, but you have one supreme leader who decides everything ultimately. And most of the Iranian people are not supporters of the regime. And despite that, he still rules. I don't think democracy, either in Saudi Arabia or in Iran, is the issue. The issue is that Iran, in particular, uses non-state actors to promote its revolutionary cause and its influence throughout the Middle East and beyond. And Saudi Arabia is trying to stop that from happening. And Saudi Arabia does not use non-state actors, unlike Iran.
But it does carpet bomb Yemen, so it amounts to the same thing, doesn't it?
No, there's a fundamental.
And Iran does not bomb any country.
I think many Syrians would
Bernard
beg to
Heikel,
differ
what's the fundamental difference?
Well, there's a fundamental difference between using your own military and using non-state actors to project your influence and your interests. Iran uses non-state actors, by which I mean terrorists. Saudi Arabia does not use terrorists to promote its state interests. It behaves like a normal state. When it tries to promote its interests, it's using its own military. It's not using non-state actors.
Even in Syria, where there's a lot of shady organizations that are linked to Saudi financing.
There are groups in Syria that are resisting the regime of Assad that receive Saudi financing, Turkish financing, American financing, Qatari financing, but these are not non-state actors. They don't obey Saudi Arabia like the non-state actors who obey Iran. Take Hezbollah in Lebanon, for instance.
Hilal Khashan, do you agree?
Well, I think both countries use non-state actors. The difference between Iran and Saudi Arabia is that Iran is an ideological state. Therefore, the non-state actors is supposed to comply fully with its political ideology, whereas Saudi Arabia does not have a state ideology, and the groups it supports do not perform as well and don't show the same level of discipline as Iranian-supported groups. I know in Lebanon, for example, Saudi Arabia tried to co-opt and use non-state actors, but it did not work out. This happened in 2008 when Hezbollah stormed West Beirut, and in a few hours it dismantled the Saudi-supported militiamen.
The current escalation, we've seen how it's gotten more and more acute as Syria's civil war goes on, but you probably have to look further back for the roots, and some of our panelists have already alluded to this. The date was February the 1st, 1979. After years of exile in France, Ayatollah Khomeini returns to Tehran. I want to put this to you, Hilal Hashan, a turning point, you might say, in the Sunni-Shia rivalry. Is that the seminal moment for what's happened today?
Well, as it was said before, when Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Iran, there was jubilation in the Arab world, and many Sunnis actually were heartened by the triumph of the Iranian Revolution. But as soon as it became clear that the Iranian Revolution was undertaking a very strict and clear Shiite political line, most Sunnis began to see things from a different perspective. And I would say, because the triumph of the Iranian Revolution paved the way towards the Iran-Iraq War in 1980.
Paved the way towards the war, the Iran-Iraq War in 1980. Bernard Heikel, there's a lot of countries around the world where the head of state is a guarantor of the religion. The Queen of England, she's the head of the Church of England, for instance. There's many examples, but states where religion and politics are so intertwined, there are no other like Saudi Arabia and Iran. Why is that?
Why are there no theocracy? First of all, I don't think Saudi Arabia is a theocracy. Iran is a theocracy. So in the case of Iran, you have a ruler who is a theologian, and who, when he issues his commands as a theologian, everyone must obey. Okay, the king in Saudi Arabia is not a theologian. So it's not a theocracy in the same sense. It's an autocracy, it's a monarchy, and it's an absolutist monarchy, but it doesn't use and wield religion in the same way, and it doesn't command obedience in the same way. That's why you constantly have Sunni groups that are fighting Saudi Arabia, whereas you don't have Shiite groups fighting Iran. Now, to go back to an earlier point, though, it is true, when the Iranian Revolution happened in 1979, it was not a sectarian state. Iran was trying to appeal to Sunnis, and at some points was very effective in doing that. It was a pan-Islamic revolutionary movement and state. Its sectarian dimension developed over time and really only became fully sectarian with the Syrian civil war that we're witnessing today. Today, Iran's backing of the Assad regime and the slaughter of, mostly Sunni Syrians by that regime, by the Assad regime, with the help of Iran and Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces, has basically turned Iran in the eyes of all Sunnis into a sectarian Shiite state, for which they will never forgive for what they've done in Syria.
Farouk Nagadar?
Yeah. The main opposition of President Assad is ISIS. And ISIS is quite theological, quite cruel, and everybody agrees it's a terrorist group. And if the ISIS is there, because the war was there, and this war was financed by Saudi Arabia and to some extent by Turkey, what happened in Syria should not be calculated as an Iranian action. Iranian did not bring their war. The war happened there because of foreign influence and foreign support of the terrorist group of ISIS or Jabhat al-Nusra and the other militants who were fed by Saudi Arabia. This first. The second, what happened in Iraq and a Shia government shaped there, it was not because Iranian invasion to Iraq. Saddam Hussein, which was Sunni and Sunni-supported government, was toppled by Americans and British troops. And then there was a free election on the supervision of the United Nations, and the government over there, I'm not supporting or condemning this government, which is in office in Iraq, but this government is close to Iran, and this government is a result of election. In Bahrain, I just bring two examples that Saudi Arabia invaded, has some invasion in Iraq, Yemen, in Egypt, Yemen, and Bahrain. And these countries where the troops or planes or financial supports sent to carry out a coup in Egypt, bombs, planes to bomb Yemen, and troops to Bahrain to crash this dissidents.
Okay, we agree
in
that both
Bahrain.
sides have proxies. Now, what do we do? Where do we start to tone it down?
Yeah, the main solution is to accept the Iranian offer to sit down behind the tables, negotiation table, and sort out any differences. Mr. Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, offered Saudi Arabia to sit down and sort out any differences through negotiation. So far, there is no response from the Saudi Arabia.
But there have been negotiations, Farouk. There have been negotiations where the Iranian government was insisting on the right to have manifestations and demonstration at Hajj, which is unacceptable.
It was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago, but why did they refuse? Why did Iran not allow the pilgrims come to Saudi Arabia this year?
The disastrous invasion to the Saudi embassy in Tehran, which was condemned by part of the government and part of the people who were involved in this disaster, to invade the Saudi Arabia embassy, were in jail. But Saudi Arabia's response is silence.
Yeah, well, who is the response to? Is the response to the side that allowed for these attacks on the embassy and consulate to happen? Or is the response to the people with the friendly message? And I think this is something that our foreign minister Adil Jubair has said many times. Many countries feel they don't know who they're talking to in Iran. And I think this is a reason why there's no response. Until there's a clear response from Iran as to is there a response to this invitation to those that have condemned it? Or is it the response to the people that support it? Are we responding to Rouhani when he's being friendly and condemning the attack, or responding to the Revolutionary Guard in Syria and claiming to take over the Arab world? Who are we responding to? Who was behind the attacks?
To Mr. Rouhani, which is officially responsible for the foreign policy.
Mr. Rouhani, or the supreme leader, whose remarks about Saudi Arabia and the royal family and the government are also not friendly. It's not very clear.
The negotiation channel is through the government, through Mr. Rouhani and Mr. Zarif, and they did nuclear negotiations with the West, and successfully. And if Saudi Arabia and any other countries around the region wants to sort out to settle down the questions, should sit down with these people who are eager, who are willing to sit down and negotiate about the differences.
Actions speak louder than words, my friend.
Let me bring in Hilal Hashan on this. You're in Lebanon, whose population has swelled by a quarter under the weight of the refugees. There are fighters from both sides in the Syrian conflict who go to Lebanon. What is the key way in which this Sunni-Shia divide can be toned down?
Well, Lebanon is on the recipient end of Middle Eastern conflicts. Political issues, problems do not initiate in Lebanon, but Lebanon, because of the nature of the Lebanese political system, which is patron-client oriented, each Lebanese sect has a foreign sponsor, and foreign sponsors affect to a very large degree what goes on in Lebanon. Therefore, if you really want to stabilize Lebanon, you need to stabilize the entire region. Right at this present time.
Like, for instance, right now you don't have a president. You're saying that you won't have a president until Iran and Saudi Arabia bury the hatchet?
Absolutely, and it does not appear it's going to happen anytime soon. Therefore, it is our destiny to remain without a president until the two countries reach terms. I don't think the two countries will reach terms before the US and Russia find a way to deal with the Syrian crisis.
So the US and Russia, right now we know there's that chatter going on between the two foreign ministers. You're saying that is important?
Yes. Yes, exactly. I mean, I don't think the outcome to the Syrian conflict will be found neither in Riyadh nor in Tehran, but between the Russians and the United States. I think both the Russians and the Americans are in a position to have their say on the situation and coerce the other countries, the countries of the region, to accept whatever arrangement they reach on Syria.
Well, I think they will include the Syrians as well.
Bernard Heikel, do you agree that part of the way to tone down this rivalry goes through Washington and Moscow?
Yes. I mean, I think that the Americans and the Russians, I mean, I don't know about the Russians, frankly, but certainly the Americans can play a role in trying to get these two sides to de-escalate. In particular, you know, in Iraq, for instance, Iran has almost completely dominated the political scene. The government of Iraq is it's almost like a vassal state of Iran.
Well, you say it's almost a vassal state, Bernard, but the highest Shia authority doesn't answer to Iran and often spells out his differences with Tehran. Not all of the Shiites support Tehran.
Yeah, you're talking about Ayatollah Sistani in Iraq. He's been completely marginalized politically and religiously by the Iranians. I mean, that's a whole other chapter,
sure,
which we don't want to open right now. But I think the Americans still have a tremendous amount of influence. President Obama has chosen not to use it in Syria and in other places. Instead, he has wanted to negotiate a nuclear agreement with Iran, which has been successfully negotiated. And in giving Iran this nuclear agreement, he has turned a blind eye to many other actions of the Iranians in other countries, most importantly in Syria,
all right,
which is a tragedy.
Which is a tragedy. Bernard Heikel, I want to thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So much more to say. I want to thank as well Farouk Nagadar for joining us from London, Hilal Kashan in Beirut, and Faisal Abu Hassan. Stay with us, though. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello now to Diptyque Laurent, the diplomatic war of words. Again, it's all heating up on the eve of the Hajj, the annual pilgrimage to Mecca.
That's right, François. We're seeing, well, not surprisingly, very sort of one-sided perspectives from media from Saudi Arabia and from Iran. Let's start with the Saudi media. This is from Al Hayat, a pro-Saudi newspaper online. This headline here, basically quoting the Saudi Minister for Religion, who says, Iran does not want Hajj to take place peacefully. So, sort of putting it back on Iran. This headline is from another Saudi newspaper, Al-Shaq Al-Awsat, which basically says, Khamenei is inciting tensions and Hezbollah is sort of following out on those orders. This newspaper says that Hezbollah has joined Iran in boycotting the Hajj season, and even has gone as far as issuing a directive to its members saying you're not allowed to participate, and if you do, you could be dismissed. Allegedly, a Twitter user under the name of a defected Hezbollah member has warned that the group could even send operatives to Hajj posing as pilgrims to create chaos. But really, who's suffering from all of this? It's the pilgrims, and we really see that in this cartoon here. You see the Ayatollah, that sort of imposing figure in black, the arrows reflecting the barbs that Iran and Saudi Arabia are trading with each other, and the pilgrims who are really just stuck in the middle of it.
Stuck in the middle of it. 60,000 of them came last year, and this year it'll just be a small handful. I suspect a different take from Iran's press.
Absolutely. A couple of articles. This one is from Al-Akbar, which is actually a pro-Hezbollah website, which reports that the Iranians really denounced the fact that the Saudi authorities never apologized nor compensated the families of the victims who were killed last year. And Al-Alam, an Iranian television network, also denounces what it calls Saudi silence over its crimes and calls it the biggest catastrophe for the Muslim world.
We heard earlier from our guest there, Hilal Hassan in Beirut. There is, again, it's been central to this debate, the spillover effect on the entire region.
Absolutely, and we're seeing, other countries sort of chime in and taking sides. Let's start with, of course, the Arab League, which condemned Iran in this dispute and actually accused them of wanting to politicize Hajj. Now, Morocco has also taken sides in support of Saudi Arabia. According to this website, it reports that the Foreign Affairs Ministry released a statement in which it hailed the measures taken out by the Saudi authorities, saying, it's to protect the pilgrims. It's in favor of security and the comfort and so forth. But on the other side, it's not all Sunni countries are blanket have this blanket support of Saudi. You have Algeria, which launched a citizen movement 6 months ago, calling for a boycott of Hajj, but really for the reasons that are very different. Basically, they say it's become too commercialized, and they're very angry about the fact that pilgrims have to pay so much money and really endure very difficult conditions. All this really, what they say, is to finance the Saudi regime.
Oh, yeah, the cost of Hajj is certainly worth a debate. I want to thank you for that, Diptyque Laurent. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.